The diamond on my finger caught the light as I reached for my wine glass, and my mother's eyes narrowed like a hawk spotting prey. I knew that look. It was the same one she'd given me when I got accepted into my dream college, right before telling me I needed to stay local to help with Catherine's wedding planning. My name is Mia, and I've spent 28 years being the family's afterthought. But tonight was supposed to be different. Felix and I had chosen this upscale restaurant specifically to announce our engagement, hoping the public setting might temper any negative reactions. It's cubic zirconia, right? Catherine leaned across the table, her perfectly manicured fingers reaching for my hand. I mean, Felix is still finishing his residency. Actually, it's a family heirloom. Felix interjected, his hand finding mine under the table. My grandmother's. How practical, my mother Laura said, swirling her wine. Though I always pictured you with something more substantial, like the ring Robert gave Catherine. Robert and I aren't together anymore, Mom. Catherine snapped, then forced a smile. But congratulations, little sister. Have you set a date? Next June, I replied. We've already started looking at venues. June? My mother's fork clattered against her plate. But that's when Catherine was planning her housewarming party. We've already discussed the catering. Felix squeezed my hand harder. We'd practiced for this moment. The deposit's already paid, I said firmly. We found the perfect place. Speaking of deposits, my mother dabbed her lips with her napkin. We need to discuss something rather important, a family matter. The waiter appeared with our entrees, and I seized the momentary interruption to take a deep breath. Across the table, Catherine was typing furiously on her phone, probably updating her Instagram story about her perfect little sister's engagement. Can't it wait, Mom? Tonight's supposed to be about Mia and me, Felix said, his doctor's confidence showing through. Family comes first, my mother replied. Always, right, Mia? There it was. The guilt trigger she'd installed in me since childhood. But something felt different this time. Maybe it was the weight of Grandma Giselle's letter in my purse, or maybe it was Felix's unwavering support, but I didn't feel the usual urge to cave. You're right, Mom. Family does come first. I raised my glass. To family and all its surprises. Catherine's phone stopped mid-click as she caught my tone. For once, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. My mother's smile remained fixed, but her eyes darted between us, calculating. Little did they know, I had a surprise of my own. Grandma Giselle had taught me well. Sometimes the best revenge is letting people think they're winning, right until the moment they lose everything. 3 days after our engagement dinner, my mother summoned me to her house for tea. I found Catherine already there, perched on the edge of the antique sofa, like she owned it. The familiar scent of Mom's lavender candles couldn't mask the tension in the air. Darling, we need to discuss your wedding fund, my mother began, setting down a cup of Earl Grey in front of me. The china clinked deliberately against the saucer. What about it? I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, already dreading where this was heading. Catherine's found the most wonderful property, Mom beamed. It's perfect for her fresh start after Robert. But the down payment is a bit more than we anticipated. Catherine leaned forward, her eyes bright with that familiar entitled gleam. It's got a pool, Mia, and space for Mom to stay when she visits. It's basically an investment in our whole family's future. And my wedding fund factors into this, how exactly? I asked, though I already knew. Well, my mother's voice took on that syrupy tone she used when she was about to destroy something I wanted. We thought, since Felix's family is so comfortable, they wouldn't mind covering more of the wedding expenses. You want my wedding fund for Catherine's house? The words felt bitter in my mouth. Don't be dramatic. Catherine rolled her eyes. You can have a perfectly nice wedding at the community center. I'll even help with the decorations. The community center. I set my cup down with a sharp clink. The same place where you said you wouldn't attend your high school reunion because it was beneath you. Mia, my mother's voice turned sharp. Your sister needs this. After everything with Robert. After she cheated on him with his best friend, you mean? The room went deadly quiet. Catherine's face flushed red. That's enough. Mom stood up, her hands trembling slightly. I've already spoken with the bank. The wedding fund will be transferred to Catherine's account tomorrow. You can't do that, I said. That money's in my name. Actually, my mother's smile turned cold. I'm still a co-signer on that account. From when you were in college, remember. And if I refuse? Then perhaps I should have a chat with Felix's parents about certain incidents from your teenage years. I'm sure they'd be interested to know about that time you— Stop! My voice came out stronger than I expected. I'll think about it. Don't think too long, dear, my mother called, as I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. The seller needs an answer by Friday. I made it to my car before the tears started falling. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and texted Felix, "We need to talk, now." Felix met me at our favorite coffee shop, the one tucked away in a quiet corner of downtown. His scrubs were wrinkled from a long hospital shift, but his eyes were alert as I recounted the afternoon's ambush. "They can't just take your money," he said, sliding his untouched espresso back and forth between his hands. "Mom can. Her name's still on the account." I slumped forward, resting my forehead against the cool table. "She's going to ruin everything." "No, she's not." Felix's voice had that calm certainty he used with his patients. "Because we have something they don't know about." I lifted my head. "What are you talking about?" Felix glanced around before leaning closer. "Remember last month when we visited your grandmother's friend Natasha? Well, after you went to the bathroom, she pulled me aside, showed me some documents. My heart started racing. "What documents?" "Your grandmother Giselle left you more than just that old recipe box, Mia. There's a trust fund, a big one, but there's a catch. You only get it if your family maintains a supportive relationship with you." I sat back, stunned. "How much?" "Enough to buy Catherine's dream house 10 times over." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Your grandmother was smart. She knew exactly what kind of people they were. But why didn't Natasha tell me directly?" "The terms of the trust specified that you couldn't know until you truly needed it. Something about making sure you developed your own strength first." He reached across the table, taking my hands in his. "And you have, Mia. You're not that scared little girl anymore." My mind was spinning with possibilities. "So if they try to take my wedding fund, they'll be shooting themselves in the foot. The trust has specific clauses about financial coercion. The moment they try to force you to give up your wedding fund, they violate the terms." For the first time since the afternoon's confrontation, I felt myself smile. "What should we do?" "Play along," Felix suggested. "Let them think they're winning. Meanwhile, we'll document everything, every threat, every manipulation attempt. Natasha's already agreed to help. Mom's going to lose it when she finds out." "That's the point." Felix's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Sometimes the best medicine is a taste of their own tactics." I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Okay, let's do this." "That's my girl." Felix squeezed my hands. "By the way, your mom's threat about your teenage years? I already know about the shoplifting incident, and the fake ID, and that time you tried to dye your hair purple, and it turned orange instead." I laughed, really laughed, for the first time that day. "I love you, you know that?" "I know. Now, let's go plan a wedding. And maybe a little karma while we're at it." Natasha's garden apartment smelled like fresh-baked cookies and decades of secrets. She ushered me inside with a knowing smile, her silver hair catching the afternoon light. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said, settling into her favorite armchair. "Tea." "Did you know this would happen?" I asked, perching on the edge of her floral sofa. "About Mom and Catherine trying to take my wedding fund. Your grandmother predicted something like this." Natasha reached for an old leather photo album. "Laura pulled the same stunt with Giselle's wedding fund for your Aunt Marie. History repeats itself, especially with people who never learn their lessons." She flipped open the album, pointing to a photo of my mother as a young woman, standing next to a tearful Marie. "Your aunt ended up having a courthouse wedding. 2 months later, your mother bought her first Mercedes. Why didn't Grandma Giselle stop her?" "She did, in her own way." Natasha's eyes twinkled. That Mercedes. Transmission failed after 3 months. The replacement cost exactly what she'd taken from Marie. Giselle arranged that, you know. Knew a mechanic who owed her a favor. I leaned forward. So the trust fund is her way of protecting you, even now. Natasha pulled out an envelope from between the album's pages. But there's more. Your mother's been busy lately, making calls about your wedding venue. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? She's been trying to cancel your reservation, telling them you have a history of not paying bills. Natasha handed me the envelope. Lucky for us, I still have friends at the country club. They recorded the calls. Inside the envelope were transcripts and a USB drive. My hand shook as I read my mother's words. I'm just trying to protect your business from my unstable daughter. There's something else you should know, Natasha said softly. Catherine's dream house? It's not for her. Your mother plans to move in there herself. Catherine's just the front. But why? Your father's finally filed for divorce. Laura needs somewhere to go, and she's using Catherine to get it. Just like she's always used both of you. I felt the pieces clicking into place. That's why she's so desperate for my wedding fund. Exactly. Natasha reached over and squeezed my hand. Giselle saw all of this coming. That's why the trust has such specific conditions. The moment Laura tries to sabotage your wedding, she loses everything, I finished. But what about Catherine? Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their actions. Natasha's voice was gentle but firm. Are you ready for what comes next? I thought about years of being second best, of sacrificed dreams and swallowed pride. Yes, I said, I'm ready. Then let's give them a show they'll never forget. The first sign of Catherine's sabotage came during our engagement party. I watched from across the room as she cornered Felix's mother, Patricia, by the champagne table. It's just so tragic. Catherine's voice carried just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Mia's spending habits have always been a concern. Did she tell you about the credit cards? Felix appeared at my side, jaw tense. Want me to intervene? No, I whispered, squeezing his hand. Let's see how far she'll go. Patricia's expression remained neutral as Catherine continued. And the gambling, Mom's been trying to get her help for years. How interesting, Patricia replied, sipping her champagne. Especially since I handle all of Felix's financial planning. Mia's credit score is nearly perfect. Catherine's face flushed. Well, in fact, Patricia continued sweetly, I just helped her set up a new investment portfolio. Did you know she's been saving half her salary since college? I bit back a smile as Catherine retreated, but my victory was short-lived. An hour later, my phone buzzed with messages from our wedding venue. There's been a complaint, the coordinator wrote. Something about bounce checks and canceled events in the past. Before I could respond, another message arrived from our caterer. Sorry, but we heard you're involved in some legal troubles. We'll have to cancel. It's starting. I showed Felix the messages. Mom's making her move. Perfect timing, he grinned. Because I just got an interesting call from the realtor handling Catherine's dream house. My mother chose that moment to sweep over, her smile sharp as a knife. Darling, I heard about the venue. Such a shame. But the community center is still available. Actually, I matched her smile. We've found somewhere better, the Hamilton estate. Her face went pale. That's impossible. They're booked years in advance. Patricia's sister owns it, Felix explained cheerfully. She was happy to squeeze us in, especially after hearing about the situation. What situation? My mother's voice turned dangerous. Oh, you know, I waved my hand dismissively, just like she always did. Just some silly rumors going around about canceled venues and false complaints. The police are looking into it. The police. Fraud is such an ugly word, isn't it? I leaned closer. Almost as ugly as trying to steal your daughter's wedding fund for a house you're planning to take from your other daughter. The glass in her hand shook slightly. I don't know what you're talking about, don't you? I pulled out my phone, showing her Natasha's evidence. Maybe we should ask Catherine what she thinks about your real plans for her dream house. For the first time in my life, I watched my mother retreat without a comeback. As she hurried away, Felix whispered, "Ready for the grand finale?" I nodded. Time to end this game. Sunday family dinner had always been my mother's stage, but tonight, the spotlight would shift. I arrived early, helping her set the table, while Felix picked up Natasha. "Catherine's running late," Mom announced, straightening the silverware for the third time. "Something about the house paperwork." "Really?" I placed the last wine glass down. "That's strange, considering the seller called me yesterday." The fork in her hand clattered against the china. "Why would they call you?" "Oh, you know how word gets around in small towns." I smoothed the tablecloth. "Especially about mothers using their daughters as proxies for property purchases." The doorbell rang before she could respond. Catherine burst in, waving papers. "Mom, we got it. The house is—" "What's she doing here?" She stopped short, staring at Natasha, who entered behind Felix. "I invited her," I said. "We're family, aren't we? And family means no secrets." "Absolutely no secrets," Natasha agreed, settling into Dad's old armchair. My father, predictably absent, was probably at his golf club, avoiding drama as usual. "Well, this is lovely." My mother forced a smile. "Catherine, tell everyone about the house." "It's perfect," Catherine gushed. 4 bedrooms, pool, guest house. "Perfect for Mom to live in after the divorce?" I interrupted. The room went silent. Catherine's mouth opened and closed, like a fish out of water. "What are you talking about?" she finally managed. "Should I tell her?" I turned to my mother. "Or would you like to explain how you're using her to buy yourself a new home?" "That's ridiculous," Mom snapped. "Catherine, don't listen to her. She's just jealous, like always." "Really?" I pulled out my phone. "So these emails between you and the realtor discussing the mother-in-law's suite renovations, those are fake? Or the calls about changing the deed to your name after closing?" Catherine grabbed the phone, her face growing paler with each scroll. "Mom, what is this?" "It's not what it looks like," our mother started, but Natasha cut her off. "It's exactly what it looks like. Just like when you took Marie's wedding fund. Just like every scheme you've ever pulled." "You don't know anything," Mom hissed. "I know everything," Natasha replied calmly. "Giselle made sure of that. And now, it's time for the truth to come out." She reached into her bag, pulling out a thick envelope with my grandmother's distinctive handwriting. "What's that?" Catherine asked, her voice small. "Justice," I said, watching my mother's face crumble as Natasha broke the seal. "And maybe a little karma." The grandfather clock in the hall struck 7, its chimes echoing through the tension-filled room. The moment of truth had arrived, and there was no turning back now. "My dearest granddaughters," Natasha read, Grandma Giselle's words filling the room. "If you're hearing this, then the pattern I feared has continued." My mother tried to stand, but Felix stepped behind her chair, his presence keeping her seated. "To my Laura," the letter continued, "I've watched you pit my granddaughters against each other, just as you did with your sister Marie. Your manipulation ends today." Catherine sank onto the sofa, her face ashen. "Mom, what is she talking about?" "To Catherine," Natasha read on. "Your grandmother loved you, but feared your mother's influence would corrupt you. She was right." "This is absurd," my mother interrupted. "That letter isn't even legal." "And to Mia," Natasha's voice grew stronger, "who reminded me so much of myself, I leave you my entire estate, valued at just over $2 million. The room erupted. Catherine jumped up. "That's not fair." "There's a condition," Natasha continued. "The inheritance is contingent on your family's treatment of you. Any attempt to manipulate, coerce, or sabotage Mia's happiness invalidates their claim to any future support or benefits from the estate." My mother's perfectly manicured nails dug into the armrests. "You planned this, you vindictive little—" "I've documented everything," I cut in. "The wedding venue cancellation attempts, the false complaints, the plot to steal my wedding fund. It's all here." I patted the folder on the table. "You can't prove anything." she snarled. Actually, Felix spoke up. We can, and the trust's lawyers are very interested in the paper trail. Catherine turned on our mother. You used me? The house was never for me. Catherine, sweetie, I was trying to protect us both. Like you protected Aunt Marie, I asked, or did you think we'd never find out about that either? The doorbell rang again. This time, it was my father who walked in, his golf clothes replaced by a suit. Dad, Catherine whispered. I got your message, he said to me, then turned to our mother. Laura, the divorce papers are ready, and no, you can't have the house. My mother's face crumpled. Aaron, please. Enough, he said firmly. I've ignored this for too long. What you've done to our daughters, it stops now. Natasha stood, placing the letter on the table. The trust goes into effect immediately. Mia, as stipulated, you'll receive the first transfer tomorrow. This isn't over, my mother threatened. You're right, I replied calmly. It's just the beginning. Catherine, we should talk, without Mom present. Catherine nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face as 20 years of manipulation unraveled before her eyes. Sometimes karma arrives with a whisper, sometimes with a bang. Tonight, it arrived with a grandmother's love letter and the sweet sound of justice being served. The autumn breeze carried the scent of roses as I stood in the Hamilton Estates garden, adjusting Catherine's bridesmaid dress. After everything, she'd asked to be part of the wedding. Really asked, without manipulation or hidden agendas. You look beautiful, she said softly, touching the lace on my wedding gown. I'm sorry I almost ruined this. You didn't, Mom did. I squeezed her hand. Besides, you're making up for it by letting me help you find your own apartment. A one-bedroom in the city, she smiled. No pool, no guest house, but it's mine, really mine. Natasha appeared in the doorway. It's time, girls. And Mia, your mother's here. My heart skipped. After the trust revelation, Mom had moved in with her sister Marie. Karmic justice at its finest. She hadn't spoken to any of us in weeks. Do you want me to ask her to leave? Felix appeared beside me, looking handsome in his tuxedo. No, I decided. Let her watch. The ceremony was everything I'd dreamed of. Dad walked me down the aisle, his grip firm and supportive. I saw Mom in the back row, smaller somehow, without her usual armor of designer clothes and practiced superiority. When Felix and I exchanged vows, I caught her wiping away tears. During the reception, she approached our table. Congratulations, she said stiffly. The ceremony was lovely. Thank you for coming, I replied, matching her formal tone. Marie's been telling me things about myself, about how I treated her, you, everyone. She twisted her hands together. I'm seeing a therapist. Good, I said simply. I don't expect forgiveness, she continued. But I wanted you to know, you were never second best, Mia. I was just too broken to show love properly. Before I could respond, Catherine joined us. Mom, your taxi's here. Of course. She straightened her shoulders. Goodbye, girls. We watched her leave, this diminished version of the woman who'd once loomed so large in our lives. She's trying, Catherine said quietly. Sometimes trying isn't enough, I replied. Sometimes you need to rebuild from scratch. Felix pulled me onto the dance floor as the band started playing. Over his shoulder, I saw Natasha raising her glass to me, Grandma Giselle's emerald ring glinting on her finger. Happy? Felix asked, spinning me under the twinkling lights. More than happy, I said. Free. Later that night, as guests drifted away and stars appeared above the estate's gardens, Catherine and I sat on the terrace steps, sharing the last piece of wedding cake. You know what's funny, she said. Mom always taught us that family means sacrifice. But really, family means letting each other grow. I nodded, watching the night sky. And sometimes growing means letting go. The future stretched before us, uncertain but full of possibility. Not just for me and Felix, but for all of us. Broken pieces finally healing, separately but stronger.